Hello everybody, and thank you very much for coming along. We appreciate this is the final session of the day. Everybody's obviously preparing for the quiz and the dinner later, so we do appreciate you sticking around for this session. My name is Will Crook, and I'm the Head of Policy and Communications at Publishers Licensing Services, or PLS as we're more commonly known. And I'm essentially PLS's man in Westminster, amongst many other things. Now, we're here today for what has kind of become our annual group therapy session. But this won't be a presentation this year, and it won't be a panel in the kind of traditional sense. And it really should say that I'm co-presenter rather than a chair, because today is going to be a bit more of an informal chat and a bit more like a podcast, I guess you could say. And in fact, my initial thoughts for the title was to call it "The Rest is Copyright." But who is the Rory Stewart and who is the Alistair Campbell in this scenario? I will leave that down to you. I'll let you decide. Anyway, just to say that we'll obviously open it out for questions later on, and we'd like some audience participation too. So do think about questions or things to say towards the end. And yeah, it only kind of leaves me to say that joining me on stage is the copyright rights and licensing expert, as well as head of permissions and licensing at Springer Nature, Leslie Landsman. Now, Leslie is also the chair of the ALPSP Policy Committee. So perhaps before we begin all of this, do you just want to say a few words on the work of the committee and what is it that it's there to do?
100%. As Will obviously works in policy day to day and does a fantastic job, but the ALPS Policy Committee is also very involved in supporting various different initiatives happening all over the world. We have a very international group with many members here in the conference. So if you're all interested in learning more about the Policy Committee, find either myself or Sarah, Alex, Abby. We have a lot of people here who are in the Policy Committee. All are welcome, very open doors. We work on everything from copyright interventions to open access issues, trust in science, very many issues globally. If you don't want to be that involved, but you still want to keep more up to date on what's going on in the world of policy, I recommend that you subscribe to or click like and subscribe to the Policy Bulletin, which comes out quarterly and is curated by our fantastic editor, Astrid, who is also here. So if you want more information about that, please do contact anyone at ALPS to find out more. And we are going to start off talking a little bit about policy, and despite all the things I might say in 10 minutes, policy is very, very important, and what's happening globally is presenting some real kind of obstacles to success, some might see, particularly in the space of AI. So Will, as someone who really does this and does this excellently, what can you tell us about what's going on in the world of policy?
Well, you're totally right, Leslie, in the sense that it is a global issue, and there are governments now across the world kind of grappling with copyright and its relationship with AI. Now, I'm probably going to start this off very parochially with the UK experience, acknowledging that this is not just a UK problem, but obviously, ever since I joined PLS in December 2021, it's been pretty much the only thing I've been working on ever since. So as many people, actually I think last year when we were here, we obviously had a few months of a new government, new Labour government. And as I remember, I think I said at the time, expect another consultation. This copyright AI issue is not really going to go away. They're kind of keen to look at it again. As everybody, I'm sure, remembers, the previous Conservative government tried to introduce a very broad copyright exception, which was kind of reversed, thankfully. But we knew that once the new government kind of got their feet under the table, as it were, they would look at it again, which it turned out they did. And as a kind of nice Christmas present for everybody, they published I think it was a 47-page consultation in December. Just as we were saying, well, they're not going to do anything this side of Christmas, they decided to publish a consultation. It was a very extensive consultation, but obviously the main subject was on copyright and its relationship with AI, certainly in the ingestion and use of content in training. So the government put forward 4 options in this consultation. I think like option 0 was essentially do nothing. Option 2 was a kind of the broad exception that the previous government hadn't successfully introduced, but they had a preferred option, and this was option 3. And option 3 was that they would introduce a copyright exception with a rights reservation. So those of you kind of familiar with the kind of what's happening in the EU exception, it's kind of along those lines. But as part of a kind of package of measures, they would also introduce transparency provisions for AI models. Okay, so a kind of a way of maybe trying to placate both AI and the creative industries. Now, what I don't think they were expecting was the 11,500 responses that the IPO found in their inbox a few days later when they opened this consultation. Fair to say, for a IP or any kind of copyright consultation, it's by far the largest. So obviously there was responses from the AI side, not that many apparently, not as many as they were expecting, but a huge number from the creative industries, obviously ALPSP, as well as PLS, I think CLA, CCC I think also responded to the consultation. But not just that, but a lot of individual creators responded. So I was talking to somebody at the IPO, and they were kind of dragging everybody in from any team. You know, if you were sat doing nothing at the IPO, the Intellectual Property Office, I should say, they were dragging everybody to kind of go through these consultation responses. But he was saying that there was actually a few with just one-word responses, which I thought was quite funny. Like, with question 1, do you agree with what the government? I think the question was, it honestly was, do you agree with option 3 being the best one? And other people just put no, which I thought was straight to the point and no waffle. So yeah, a lot of responses, and they're still reviewing the responses now. We still don't know. I don't think they've finished, and we still don't know when that's going to kind of that's going to be produced, and the results are going to come out. So, yeah, we've obviously had a bit of, since the consultation finished, which was in February, the government had a bit of difficulty getting their data use and access bill through the House of Lords, where Baroness Kidron tried to add in the transparency measures as amendments. That got taken out, but the government were defeated, I think, 5 times in the end, which is incredible, really, for a new government. But it created a lot of press attention. Certainly, Sir Elton John wasn't particularly happy about it and called the Technology Secretary, well, the former Technology Secretary, various names, but it obviously garnered quite a lot of publicity, and it made it front-page news. And you know, for those like me who've been kind of working on it for a while, to see copyright kind of mentioned so kind of broadly or so everywhere was kind of odd to see. So kind of where are we now? So everybody probably knows there was a reshuffle last week that was kind of started by Angela Rayner. Whatever was going on there, the government decided to have a kind of pretty extensive reshuffle. The Culture Department wasn't touched so much, which is kind of odd because usually the Culture Secretary is the one that gets moved in every reshuffle, and we've had quite a lot in the last few years. But Lisa Nandy, a local MP, Wigan, I believe, is still in place. But we have the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology have a completely new team. And Liz Kendall, sorry, I should say, is the new Secretary of State for DCIT. I would say perhaps, and I believe that number 10 weren't particularly happy with the lack of progress there'd been with the copyright and AI work. And I think maybe a bit disappointed by the negative headlines that came out from Elton John, as one of many, during the data use and access debates. But also, I think Peter Carr got a lot of criticism for being too friendly with tech, too much of a tech bro, and I think that kind of counted against him. And Lisa Nandy was saying on Tuesday that they kind of expressed regret that it had been too binary, it had been seen as creative industries versus AI, and maybe not enough kind of putting kind of hands across the aisle and things like that. So we have at the moment a completely new team, maybe a chance to start again. The government have said they regret putting a preferred option in the consultation because it literally gave everybody something to aim at, and kind of it looked like the government had literally prejudged everything. So I think people were asking what the kind of point of the whole exercise was. But yeah, hopefully the new team, we're having working group meetings with the government, which PLS will be at in September. Tom West, our CEO, will be sitting down with a group of AI and creative industry representatives, as well as the new Secretary of State, Liz Kendall. So good that she'll be hearing from not just us, but the kind of copyright, copyright-related organizations quite so early on. But yeah, very, very positive on that sense. Now, another thing the government kind of point out, and especially the option 3, was its closeness to the EU option. And a lot of the things they were saying, they wanted it to be just as kind of good as the EU, where we were saying there are kind of a lot of problems with the EU system still, even though they've had it for a few years. There has been a bit of progress with the EU. I'm going to now pass the baton back to you, Leslie, with the EU work that ALPS, or the Policy Committee, has done with the Code of Practice that they have. And
yeah, I think regret is probably a good word to use from many people who are involved in governance of these issues right now. The EU has been through quite a prolonged and painful process, coming out with the EU AI Code of Practice, which was recently released. This does include provisions both on copyright and transparency. And suffice to say, I think that there's some stumbling blocks for both sides in understanding exactly what this act does. We know that there are some major tech players who have decided to not opt into this code of practice. Perhaps there was some other conflicting legislation out there. And I think the general sense of what the EU intended when they first set out, which was to mimic what they did when it comes to privacy and the GDPR and things like this, they thought they'd just kind of take that same track and apply it to AI, and it didn't work out in quite the same way that I think that they had thought. Similarly, so surprised that all the rights holders in tech didn't agree on a solution, which is funny because there is a really obvious solution out there, which is just licensing, which is the only thing that's going to matter. So while I 100% support everything that Will does, all the people in this room and outside this room who work in these policy issues, the work I do, I mean, I also contribute to all of this, and that has its place. It's very important that rights holders are well represented in these conversations. At a certain point, that is never going to provide an answer. The EU AI Act is not going to provide an answer. What happens in the UK is not going to provide an answer. What happens with fair use in the US, remembering that fair use is a specific defense to an infringement. It is not an exception. It is not something general. So even if we get one fair use decision this side, it'll only really apply to those specific facts at hand. So that's not helpful.
And it's really interesting, when we said about fair use, I mean, I think I've been to a lot of conferences and I've heard from people working in government, they always mention fair use as, well, you know, look over in America, they've got it they have fair use as something that these AI companies can use, but that's...
They have fair use. This is a defense, it's codified, but this doesn't mean that it's going to be some escape clause to allow for global AI businesses to operate. The only thing that's going to work in that situation is going to be licensing. That's the only thing that's going to work, and that's where there is the opportunity, and hopefully we'll have time to get to the optimism. Yeah,
well, we'll kind of stick maybe with the US at the moment, Leslie. Obviously, there's a lot of court cases going on. You're a much better expert at all these kind of things across the pond, but could you kind of maybe give a sense of the court cases out there, any common themes there, any kind of, what's your take on the number there? I mean, I'd like to touch on Anthropic, which is kind of, I'd say, probably the major case at the moment, the talking point. But I mean, as a general overall view on the cases happening over there, is there a kind of...
Well, I think it was September 9th, we hit 50. I don't think we got a t-shirt or anything for hitting the big 5-0, but we did. So we now have 50 cases, very much split between the 2nd and the 9th jurisdictions, which is basically New York and California, being the two major areas in the United States where right holders do their business. When it comes to litigation in the states, what really is going to have to happen at some point is probably going to be Supreme Court involvement, and that's a decade away. So anybody thinking that any one decision right now is going to be truly impactful, I think is missing the grander picture. We are looking for a long, long time before we really hear what the limits of any fair use analysis may be to training, let alone storage, and all the different elements that go into any AI system. It's not just one thing.
Because I mean, I think, with the case of the outcomes, I kind of have that in inverted commas so far. I think there's always been a mad dash or mad rush to say, is this friendly to AI? So what you're saying is that you're taking a longer view on the whole thing.
I do think you have to. we only got 2 days to celebrate the Anthropic victory because Judge Aslip comes along and says, wait a minute, how dare you settle a claim without telling anyone what's involved in the claim, who it involves, what works, how can, I think these are very valid points, and I do think that there's lots of room for people to be understanding what judges are saying in these cases, because they do provide us all with what it is that we need to do to identify our own rights in order to be able to employ and enjoy them. That said, Anthropic deciding to settle is a huge signifier. It does say that even tech is beginning to understand that essential resources for any system, there must be a value exchange. Nobody is expecting free water or free power. In the same way, you should not be expecting free copyright content. And that's where licensing comes in.
No, exactly. And that's kind of some of the arguments we've made to government that, obviously, certainly in the UK, I think we have some of the highest energy prices in Europe. There's a wider picture here than just copyright and the kind of content. And even if they put an exception, there's no guarantee. The UK government are very keen. I mean, they kind of say this. I think they're always talking about large language models, by the way. It's all very focused on the big LLMs. I mean, I talk about the working group with rights holders and AI. If you look at the AI companies that have been invited, I think there's only one AI company, one UK AI company invited there. And I think everybody else is like a large language model. So they're messaging on, well, we care about the SMEs and these smaller AIs. They've kind of, through that poor stakeholder management, the way it looks is that they're just kind of really interested in LLMs.
And I think that's a fallacy. I speak with a lot of people who may be involved in what might be called libraries for AI, people creating content in order to license and curating content to licensing for AI uses. And 2 years ago even, everyone thought, okay, what we need to do if we want to be in this business is get as much content as possible so we can license everything to everyone for these large LLMs. The future now very much seems to be small language models and other types of AI. This generalized AI, I think, is going to have a very limited purpose. Smaller, finer-tuned AI systems developed on very, very targeted, niche, high-value, trusted content, the type of content that everyone here may be involved in the creation and production of. That's where I think the real value for AI is going to be. It's not going to be everything on the internet about the human anatomy. It's going to be very fine-tuned, select libraries of information on specific aspects of anatomy.
No, exactly. And I've heard similar from AI companies that I think it was an event with a few AI minds, and they were saying that the large language models and effectively scraping the whole internet, that's kind of been and gone. It's the future of these AI models are going to be smaller, more accurate, because accuracy is a big issue with AI, and the kind of problems of the outputs there, which is probably a subject for another talk. But the smaller, more accurate models on smaller corpuses of content, possibly archives, is kind of where they're looking for now. And it was kind of interesting, going back to Anthropic, that if you read the judgment, it starts off by saying that Anthropic essentially decided scraping the internet was not a great way to get accurate data, that it was kind of books that they were after. So I think they literally went out, took these books, removed the pages, scanned the pages, and then fed that into the algorithm. So in terms of kind of not just the content as such, scraping the web, but also the kind of formats of this content too is something that probably publishers should start looking at.
I 100% agree with Sophia was saying in a session earlier about the supremacy of the article rather than the journal. That is what is going to become mattering more and more and more. It's not necessarily going to be your entire journal. It's going to be this one article. And I really would encourage us all to be inspired a little bit about a keynote speaker who really challenged us all to think about ways that we might, forge new ways of doing business within ourselves. And one suggestion I would make would be for people in product to talk to people in licensing. Those in licensing may very well understand what's happening in the market, what it is the market needs, and just as we are now, just now this year, really tackling human accessibility, machine accessibility is something that we are not going to be able to wait 50 years in order before us to get around to thinking about. We need to start thinking about what products we create that will be suitable for what it is what you all want, which is trusted, reliable AI systems that work, that make our lives better, that are used, specific to our individual purposes. I mean, this is a win for us all. So definitely how it is that we imagine what the article is. If we think about what happened in the internet, we very much just tried to take the print world and force it onto the internet via PDFs and things like this, taking forever to come around with EPUBs. I just don't think we have that luxury of time. And hopefully we all can learn from history rather than being doomed to repeat it and be a bit innovative. Think about breaking down some of those barriers that might traditionally exist in your own institutions or organizations. And
we're talking about the format here, but also there's been a bit of innovation in rights and licensing too on this. And Denmark, which we might touch a bit later, seems to be kind of the home of a lot going on in kind of rights and licensing and AI at the moment. But it was announced, I think in June, that they were looking at rights, I think with something to do with your facial features and voice and things like that. Is that something that publishers should be looking at too?
Other than how we deliver content, how we license content is also going to be increasingly important. And what rights are those? I very much do imagine that new rights are going to start becoming codified in many, many territories. Denmark is an example, granting central intellectual property in your face, the No Fakes Act in the US, kind of similar things, but things to protect your personality, your image, your character. These exist to some degrees in territories globally.
Guernsey has
personality,
but
thanks to Wayne Rooney. And one of the great things that Wayne Rooney did for the Isle of Guernsey was to provide the Isle of Guernsey character rights. But if you want to know more about that, catch me later.
We'll invite Wayne Rooney next year to go through personality rights.
But yes, we should be thinking about this, thinking about what that means when we are talking with our authors and with our other rights holders, what it means for licensing, because it is going to become a more complicated and evolving landscape.
No, exactly. And just to kind of go back to Denmark, I think to go back to the Optimism, I'm not sure if any of you, hopefully all of you, were at PLS conference. We had the chief executive of the DPCMO, the Danish Press Publications Collective Management Organization, to come in and give a speech on what she's doing over in Denmark to protect the rights holders over there. And it was the most inspiring speech I've kind of heard on this subject. And to kind of cut a very long story short, myself and Tom West were listening to Karen a few months ago, and she was talking about how I think she rang the police to report, I think it was OpenAI, or it wasn't OpenAI, I think it was Apple or something like that, for copyright infringement. And we thought, yes, we're going to get this person to come in and do a PLS conference. And just the week of PLS conference, she sent me an email and kind of very nonchalantly said, oh, by the way, we're suing OpenAI. I thought, brilliant. That's a great thing to have, and to kind of come in and to give a really, it was a really good pep talk, the speech. But I think Denmark, and the Danes have the presidency of the EU at the moment, so things are really coming together.
I do think there's a lot of optimism out there.
Yeah.
There's a lot of new ideas about what we can license and how we can license, new streams that we may be able to exploit. But it is a time for creativity. It is a time for getting people in the room who perhaps didn't talk to each other before and seeing what it is that they know, and so that they can educate each other.
Yeah, and there was two things from that. I think in Karen's speech, she was saying how she kind of took different strands of kind of the Danish organizations across civil society to kind of bring them together around this kind of message of freedom of speech, civil rights, and things like that. I thought that was quite inspiring. And we've kind of done something similar in the UK. The creative industries, and is maybe one slice of optimism as well, that somebody told me that the one good thing that's happened throughout this whole kind of copyright AI thing, it's brought the creative industries together around one thing. And that's kind of come out through the creation of the Creative Rights in AI Coalition, or kind of unfortunately known as CRAC, the CRAC Coalition, which has kind of, I mean, absolutely everybody across the creative industries, so ALPSP, PLS, CCC are there, CLA, and essentially it kind of works to kind of coordinate our campaign on this against the government's plans to weaken copyright. And so far, it's been very successful and very, very effective to have that kind of unified voice on this, which we probably wouldn't have had normally. I think even Mumsnet are even on this, on the Credit Call too. So it has really brought a lot of, and even some AI voices too. There are AI voices there who are kind of sympathetic to what we're saying. UK AI especially, who are also at PLS conference, who represent perhaps the smaller side of the AI industry, but are kind of still very supportive of what we're saying. So there is optimism out there that we have a very effective kind of public policy or public affairs lobby here, and not just me, but obviously there's trade associations across the creative industries. We've fought back by and large against two kind of attempts to weaken copyright. So I think at the moment, I think whilst that's kind of going off and happening in Westminster, the kind of ground's still been laid to kind of go out and license, really.
It is the only global solution.
Yeah.
But I did say we were going to make this a conversation, so perhaps we should take a question or two.
So yeah, time is kind of running out, but any questions or comments as such on rights and licensing? We've got two gentlemen there in the middle. So roaming mic.
Thank you, Michael Healy, CCC. Not a question, more of a plug, really, Will. I share your enthusiasm for Karen Rond and the Danish press CMO. Anybody who hasn't heard Karen speak will have an opportunity if they're at the Frankfurt Book Fair. She's speaking on a panel that we're organising on the Thursday afternoon, which includes Katrina from the UK Publishers Association, Mark Walford from Sage Publishing. It's moderated by Roy Kaufman at CCC. That's on the Thursday afternoon if anyone's interested in hearing Karen speak, and I do recommend you.
Yeah, it was very good. I mean, she's a very kind of diminutive Danish word, but very, very tenacious. And she came up after me and said, "Oh, was that fine? Was that fine?" And I said, "Brilliant." I mean, everybody who came out said it was really good. And just that dose of optimism. I think we've heard a lot about how, we've kind of said it a bit ourselves about how governments are trying to, looking at this, and it's kind of, there's a lot of threats out there to copyright. But it was great to hear somebody who really took it to these kind of big tech companies. Not dismissive of AI, and I think we have to be very careful. We're not completely against AI and as a technology, but it was great to, that kind of big tech influence, she was kind of out there street fighting against it, essentially. Yeah, really good. Gentleman there.
Milos from NTI. So I would like to get your thoughts on a use case that we had to run through maybe a week or two ago. So we are a gold open access publisher. All our articles are published with CC BY 4.0 license, right? So we were approached by an indexing company that we deliver our content to, that they had a request from an AI company asking rights to use our published materials to train one of their LM models. So CC BY means that the ownership of the article remains with the author, so we do rely on citations to kind of reward the work that has been done previously. So we as a publisher, we don't own the license itself, so we're not in measure to say use the content or don't use the content, especially if they don't plan to have a RAG architecture around the LM model, like not to go too much into technical details, but we're not able to grant any rights to those materials because we don't own the authorship, right? So what would be your advice in that case? Do we tell that AI company to stop doing any further kind of usage of open access content and trader models until we have a proper license change or new licenses available? Or like how to proceed now from our perspective as a publisher in the middle of the authors on one side and basically those companies that would like to get a grant or authorization from our side to use our content to train their LLM models.
Any thoughts on that, Leslie?
Open access use of content of open access content in AI is probably a whole other session.
Yeah.
Creative Commons has come out with a lot of information themselves. They have the new CC signals for whoever wants to look into that. But CC BY does have attribution requirements. This is a challenge for AI. It is difficult to know where that line is. But I do think that that is probably a little bit larger of a conversation than I could have right here in front of all of you. So perhaps we can have a chat afterwards and I can give you some more of my thoughts.
Yeah, I'll leave it with Leslie's expertise on that specific issue. But I think it is worth a session, I think. And I think MIT had a survey round recently. It was in Scholarly Kitchen. There was some very interesting kind of thoughts on, even like we're saying, it's CC/BY, but if it's being scraped by an LLM, I think there's a lot of people still uncomfortable with that being used without permission.
And remember, not all open access is CC/BY. So these terms even become complicated and overlapping. So there's a lot to unpack there. And that's why it's a fun time to be doing what I do. But with that, should we...
Well, there's just two. There's a gentleman there and a gentleman there. Very quickly, I know.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Ross Mounts. I'm from Arcadia, which is a charitable foundation with an interest in promoting research, access to research, and copyright. I thought this was a very interesting sponsored session. It would have been nice to have a librarian point of view here, because it isn't just about creatives and AI. Actually, there's libraries and there's the research point of view. Researchers are not creatives. I know you might want to encourage them to think of themselves as artists, but they're actually researchers. Yeah. Science is a public good and should be treated as such. I'd like to disagree with the point that licensing is the solution to this. Actually, there are other ways that don't involve licensing. I know the publishing industry is trying to go down the licensing route and has been doing that for decades. With the Anthropic case, I think it's very interesting that the judge only objected to the pirated downloading of LibGen and Polemy. And you mentioned the scanning in the books and destroying them, because that's actually fair use. And that's a way, if you legally purchase the content, either the print copy or on microfilm, scan that in, and then use that in AI training, I think the judge kind of thought that was fair use. And that doesn't require fresh licensing, that just requires purchasing a physical copy legally, which they did do. So there are other ways that don't involve licensing. So I thought that would be useful for this crowd to understand. Thank you.
And gentleman there, I will sum up.
Thanks, you. Rod Cookson, the Royal Society. Sorry, Ross and I are bringing the pessimism to go with your optimism here with the last comments. I like licensing, and it seems a very sensible way to approach this question. I thought the UK government and US government positions were to make carve-outs for scientific content, so that could all be scraped by LLMs, unless people actively opted out. Does that not make licensing a very difficult proposition for STM publishers? There's definitely a difference between the creative industries and scientific publishing, the way it's being seen, as I understood it by both governments.
I don't think a carve-out, I'll go back to two of these points. I don't think the carve-out has been discussed at all yet. It's not been something that's, and I don't think it was in the consultation, that element. And I think it's something that the creative rights AI is aware of, and I think the creative industries are kind of as one on this, that we'd push back rather, because you could make the same argument about news as well, are fairly kind of sensitive to these kind of things as well. So I think that's something that hasn't been mentioned and isn't not something that we're kind of pushing back on yet or anything like that, but who knows what the kind of government might come back with. And just on the researcher and librarians, SILIP are members of the Creative Rights and AI Coalition as well, so they are also, there is a librarian voice in there too. Just because I know there's kind of, we can go into granular definitions of creators and things like that, but yeah, their voice is in there too. Leslie, any kind of final thoughts on that?
Yes, I mean, I think that there's going to be lots of hills and valleys along the way. There'll be one thing that says fair use does this, there'll probably be another decision that says fair use does another thing. There are lots of people who are obviously stakeholders. We're all in one way stakeholders in what happens in AI systems. But I fundamentally agree that believe that the best way for industry to move forward is in actual cooperation, and that is going to be governed by contract or by license.
Cool.
With that, I'm going to close today's session by reading a little note that I have here, thanking everyone and all of our chairs and speakers for today's program. Tomorrow's morning session will start at 9:30, but before that, we look forward to seeing many of you at the dinner, awards presentation, and of course, the quiz. The drinks reception will be in the Deansgate foyer from 7 p.m. And please make your way out of the room now so the hotel room can clean up. Thank you very much.
Thank you.